If we remember back to our basic accounting 101, we remember that everything that we do in accounting actually goes in and affects the general ledger or the general journal. You can refer to it both ways. What we also have to remember, though, is that you shouldn't need to make general journal entries that often in Peachtree. Usually there's another, and dare I say, even better way. That's what Peachtree works so hard to do for us, to keep the accounting behind the scenes and let us focus on tasks instead. So what do we need to know about the general ledger or the general journal, abbreviated GL? Well, first of all, as I said, use another Peachtree option if it exists, and usually it does. Also remember the bookkeeping part, which is that all entries must be in balance, credits and debits. Normally, we make one entry in Peachtree, and the double entry bookkeeping happens behind the scenes. But when you work with the GL, you have to do both sides of the equation. Peachtree will not allow a transaction that is out of balance. That again is our accounting 101. So you're going to have to make it balance before you're able to save a GL entry. As a standard, the debit is entered first and the credit is entered second for both sides of that equation. Now there's no hard and fast rule that says it's the only way it works. Actually, if you do it the opposite way, it works just fine. But accountants and other professionals are used to seeing the debit entry first. So you pretty much want to conform to standards if you can. You may also need to enter multiple debits to offset one credit or vice versa. In other words, it's not necessarily just one and two transactions. Sometimes you have multiple layers on one side or the other. If you recall a sample that we did a little bit earlier with the real world in accounting, we had a couple of entries that we had to use for a sale because part of it was paid in cash, but part of it was still left in accounts receivable. That's a good example of having two parts of the transaction on the left side of the equation and one on the right. An example of something that we might need to do in the general ledger might be an end-of-year adjustment. Maybe we've sent our file off to our accountant, they found that something is just a little out of whack, and it's easier to make an adjustment in the GL rather than trying to undo or redo different types of transactions. So what's happening with the GL behind the scenes? Well, we usually use transaction windows, not the GL. Remember, that's our standpoint. The GL is always working in the background. If you choose to hide the GL accounts in the global options, they don't show in those transaction windows. I have gone ahead and turned that option off so that I am going to see the GL accounts as I work. It's a personal preference. I just like to keep an eye on what's going on. Maybe you could call it a control thing, but either way, you do have the option through global options to turn that on or off. In many of your transaction windows, you will have the option to click the journal button so that you can see that within the transaction window. And you can make changes to the GL, but don't unless you're advised to do so or you're very sure what you're doing. A lot of people think they know enough about accounting to go in and make things like end-of-year adjustments on their own or get some things to zero out. That's not the best way to do it usually. It's not the appropriate accounting way, but if it is, then an accountant will probably be the one to tell you how to do it. I can't tell you exactly what to do, but that is my strong recommendation. Many people have really messed up their books by going in and making things change in the GL when it really should have been done a different way or not done at all. Beyond my little warning, or maybe I should say I don't mean to scare you completely, but maybe just enough that you don't do something silly, we might want to make a GL entry. And that's what I've decided that I need to do for my particular Peachtree file. Let's say that we just had a $5,000 investment by one of our owners. Now that's not normal income. If I tried to claim it as income so that I could put it into a bank account, it's going to be shown just as that, as income, and that's not accurate. It's not a sale that we made. That also can cause other problems because usually I need to pay taxes on income, and that may not be fair because the $5,000 really wasn't a sale, it was instead an investment. So you can see all the different reasons why we need to make sure that we account for things correctly and not just kind of stick them in using something that might work or looks like it gets a bank account balance right but isn't really proper accounting. With that little warning, let's go ahead and make a general journal entry. I'm going to do this from the Tasks menu, which is where we're going to access most of the work that we do in Peachtree. I'll go ahead and go to Tasks and then come down almost all the way to the bottom and choose General Journal Entry. When the transaction window comes up, we can see that this is very basic. It looks kind of like a check register. Because this is a new account and we don't have any entries yet, of course it's a blank register. At the top, we can see that there's a place for a date as well as a reference. Now, one of the things you should always do, in my opinion, is put in a reference for these types of entries because they are kind of generic or mixed, if you will. They could be lots of different things. So come up with some kind of a naming scheme that might work. One easy way to do it is just to use the letters GL for General Ledger and then some kind of number, usually the date. I'm going to go ahead and enter a transaction for the 26th of August and give it a reference number. That's fairly easy to do by just typing in over the date. And you can either click with your mouse or you can press tab. You'll see that it does convert the date when I type it in using the proper formatting, so it can recognize what the month, day, and year is. Now I'll put in that reference number. As they say, that's actually the easy part. Now I need to go ahead and work with that transaction. Just a reminder, and I don't mean to repeat myself too much, but this is so important that we have to make sure we do it correctly. All of your GL entries or transactions are going to have two sides to them. You're going to have a credit and a debit, and you may need to do multiple entries. So how does that work with our $5,000 investment by our owner? Well, let's think about that just a second. What we're going to do is get an increase in money that's available to the company. So our cash is going to increase by $5,000. That's coming from owner equity, so the owner equity is also going to be increased by $5,000. In journal speak, that means the cash account will get a $5,000 debit and the owner's equity will get a $5,000 credit. And we need to enter both of those with the debit first because that's the standard in accounting. So I can go ahead and select a GL account. You can use the drop downs. Little magnifying glass will get that to you, or you can type in the account number if you happen to know it. I'm going to go ahead and type in 10,200. When you make a typographical error, it's easy to pick up because your drop down doesn't scroll appropriately. Let me go back with my left arrow key and make the correction. And then as soon as I enter a correct account number, it should be highlighted. In this case, it's my regular checking account, and that's exactly what I wanted. Now I can go ahead and finish the transaction. The next thing I need to do is a description. And this should be just that, a good, strong description for both sides of the equation. I think I'll put in that this was an owner contribution by Jeff Salazar. The reason I want to make sure that that's very descriptive for both sides is that when I press tab, that's automatically going to get copied down to the next part of my transaction. If I make it good, I don't have to retype it. Here's where we have to put in the money. This is the debit, of course, and if you're doing it in the right order, remember this should always be the first one, so you don't have to worry about what the debit and credit are. This was simply a single $5,000 contribution, so I'll put in the $5,000, and I'll tab on through to my next line. Notice as soon as I move off of the first line, that's when it copies down the description for the second half of my transaction. The second account that I need to credit is going to be my member contributions, which is $39,006. I don't necessarily expect you to be able to remember these account numbers. I just happen to know them, and to save time, it's easier to type them in if you do know them than to scroll through those very extensive lists. Once again, I don't necessarily need to change the description, so I'll tab on through it. This is the credit portion of my transaction, so I'll leave debit blank and enter $5,000 in credit. It's very important that when I think I'm done, I move to the bottom right side of the box because this is going to tell me what my totals are. $5,000 in debits, $5,000 in credits. I am not out of balance by any, which is what was required. So now I can simply move up to the top, save my transaction, and then close the window. By doing this fairly simple and straightforward journal entry, I have been able to give us a $5,000 credit to the company, correctly accounting where it came from and the fact that it went into our checking account, not trying to make things work or pigeonhole it into a way that doesn't. This is the way proper accounting works, and it's absolutely critical to make sure that your files are accurate and that you don't pay things like taxes on stuff that really wasn't income, which I think everybody wants. In addition, we were able to set up the company file with all of our good information so it will print out on those reports, as well as set some defaults like the system dates and our GL preferences so that it's all going to work the way that we need to and everything's smooth sailing from here on out.